Despite a ceasefire, Syrians continue to flee their war-torn country, adding to the already massive refugee problem. This week, a coalition of faith, community, and national security groups delivered a message to America's leaders. They say it's time to take action. Jennifer Wishon explains.
As more and more Syrians flee civil war, concerns over how and where to care for them grows. It's a moral, political, and security issue with no easy solutions.
And I can't forget, and I'll never forget, that Jesus too was a refugee. He was a refugee. He had to go to Egypt, you may recall. And what would have happened if they wouldn't have accepted him?
Congressman Vargas joined a coalition of groups calling on President Obama and Congress to do more. They delivered 10,000 signed postcards to Republican leaders, asking them to increase humanitarian aid by 30%, double the number of refugees the U.S. accepts, and guarantee the right to work and opportunity for education for at least 1 million more refugees.
This is not just a moral crisis that we face as a country and as a people. It's a political crisis worldwide. Refugees are not a temporary problem. It is a permanent problem. Those of us who think, well, in a couple of years it'll be over, wrong.
Just weeks ago, America welcomed her 10,000th refugee from Syria, meeting a goal set by President Obama. Going forward, the president wants the U.S. to accept 110,000 refugees, including 40,000 from the Middle East and South Asia. Many Americans are concerned terrorist or radicalized refugees will slip into the country. But New Jersey Congressman Bill Pascrell suggests something else is at play.
This is home-baked prejudice. There's no other way to call it. Let's call it the way it is.
And Europe has to do the same. And it's not facing that responsibility. The bigotry, the right-wing nativism and xenophobia that is sweeping Europe and at our own country is a problem not of temporary delay. It's one we got to confront head on.
As Jews, we know what it is to be victims of prejudice and to be excluded, disrespected, and targeted because of our religious identity.
As the U.S. prepares to open its doors to more than 100,000 refugees from around the world, many countries accept none or very few refugees from Syria, including many Muslim countries in the Persian Gulf like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates. Next week, President Obama joins world leaders at the United Nations, where he'll encourage them to step up and help the Syrian people. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, Jennifer. The evangelical Christian agency World Relief has helped settle thousands of refugees here in the U.S. Recently, CBN's Abigail Robertson sat down with World Relief President Scott Abritter in our Washington, D.C. bureau. She asked him about the challenges and rewards of accepting more Syrian refugees into the U.S.
Since 9/11, 800,000 refugees have been resettled in the U.S., and we don't have a known single case of domestic terrorism from a refugee. And with the really lengthy due diligence process that exists, we have a good record of due diligence and protecting our homeland, even as we've been compassionate.
So a lot of people have criticized President Obama, saying that he's only accepting Muslim refugees, despite the fact that 10% of the population of Syria is Christian. And this year alone, we've accepted 11,000 Syrian refugees, and only 56 of them have been Christian. What do you think about, are those complaints warranted, or?
Well, if you look at those numbers all by themselves, you would say, boy, there's a question to be asked there, and it's a reasonable question. But if you pull out the lens a little bit and look at the context, 39% of the refugees that have been resettled from the Middle East since 2001 have been Christians. And part of the issue with the Syrians is that the very thing that we want, which is really careful due diligence, which takes a year to a year and a half to do, means that many of those Syrian Christians who were not part of that crisis at that point in time haven't entered through that whole process yet. Also, fortunately, many of the Syrian Christians have been able to find refuge with other Christian communities in Europe and other places in the Middle East, so they have been a less vulnerable population in many cases.
Who are the refugees coming over, and what do you think are some of the biggest conceptions Americans have about them?
The refugees that are coming over are moms and kids, in some cases dads, that are coming out of families just like yours and mine, where they long to have a place called home, and that home has been taken from them. Interesting thing that we find among refugees is many of them will carry their house keys with them yet. They're not going back home. They probably know that, but there's something in them, just like in us, that says, but I want to go home. They're not looking to be resettled. They don't want to be in a different land. They want to go home to the land and the community and the culture that they're a part of, but it's not available to them. So I think one of the big misconceptions is that they're looking for just simply a chance to better themselves economically. That may happen, it may not. What they're really looking for is a chance to survive. Because if they stay where they are, they face death from the very people that we are trying to stop as well. As a friend of mine said, we have to be careful not to punish the victims of ISIS for the sins of ISIS.
What are some of the biggest needs that you all have as an organization?
I want you to imagine the picture of a refugee coming in on an airplane, not speaking the language, being frightened about what they will find, having no sense of what their visible support is going to be. And they come off the airplane and they are met by a group of people from a local church. We call them Good Neighbor teams. They take them out to the van where they have gathered other people, including people from their homeland who speak their language. They take them to the apartment that's been furnished by the local church with the help of World Relief. They show them the groceries that they have put in their refrigerators. They tell them that they'll be back to help them get signed up for English as a second language courses. They'll talk to them about the ability to get into job training, and they'll say, and by the way, we have a community called our church, and our arms are wide open to you. Can you imagine what that means to someone? Jesus was very clear. He said, do to others what you would have done to you. What would I want done if the bottom had fallen out of my life? If I had escaped my homeland, my house was in rubbles, I might not even have all my children or my husband or my wife, but I've escaped with what I have. What would I want done to me? We're looking for people who will say, I know what I would want done, and I'm prepared to do it for others. Many of us care deeply about unreached people groups. And what God has done in this season is He has said, I'm bringing them to you. And the fear is that we'll pull up the welcome mat. And we'll say, well, thank you, Lord, but no. We'll maybe send a few people over to them, but we're going to resist the ones that you're sending to us.
Thanks, Abigail.